All right, 7:02 is hit. We're almost at 30 participants, so that's great. So welcome Dr. Pilitsis, who's going to be leading this panel. I'll let her introduce the panel, but I did want to introduce Dr. Pilitsis. First, I just want to make sure everybody knows that this is a webinar that we hold every couple of months, every 2 months. This is part of the K12 Neurosurgeon Research Career Development Program, something that is run by myself, Ahmad Eskandar, Sepi Amin Hanjani, and Langston Holly, as well as Sophie, who's on, and Brigitte, who are at WashU and helped me administrate this grant. The grant is meant for first-year junior faculty interested in pursuing a career as a neurosurgeon scientist. Of importance for any of the people who are on the line, who are residents and fellows, is there's a new component to the K12 retreat that happens every fall called KPAC. Maybe Sophie or Brigitte could put that link up in the chat if you want to look at it. It's a 2-day course that's associated with our K12 retreat that's focused on junior faculty, but the KPAC is focused on mid-level and senior residents. There's a nomination process that your chair and program director can do to get you nominated to be invited to be part of that 2-day event. It's NIH sponsored, and you will have didactics, you'll have question and answer sessions, you'll be able to meet with NIH folks as well as established surgeon scientists, and then you can stay on for the actual K12 retreat. So I really highly recommend for the mid-level and senior residents to look into that and get your chair and program director to nominate you. Last year was the very first event. It was wonderful, and we're going to do it again this year, and hoping that we will continue to get funding so we can do this on an annual basis thereafter. But it's meant for residents and who are thinking about careers in academic neurosurgery to kind of get you primed for that path. So look for that. That's called KPAC. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our next webinar is October 15th, 5 to 6 Pacific, 7 to 8 Central, 8 to 9 Eastern, October 15th. Bob Carter, the chair at NGH, will be leading that. And the topic will be career arcs in academic neurosurgery. Probably we'll have people who have taken different arcs, some who have gone on to lead like brain tumor centers, some have gone on to become chairs, some have gone on to be deans, some have gone on to have hospital leadership roles. So the idea is different career arcs in academic neurosurgery. So look out for that. So today the topic is strategies for grant success. Dr. Pilitsis is currently the chair of the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Arizona, Tucson. She's also the physician executive for functional neurosurgery for Banner Health, formerly the dean at Florida Atlantic University. And Julie, a world-class leader and functional neurosurgeon and scientist. So thanks so much for doing this, and I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Greg, for the invitation, and to the entirety of the team for organizing this. So today we're going to talk about strategies for grant success. Here are my disclosures. Obviously the NIH grants are directly related, but other things aren't. And, you know, I had seen somebody give portions of this talk. So Mike DePercio is a longtime colleague from Albany Med. And so I borrowed some of his slides, and then NIH has a slideshow on NIH Grants 101. So some information is taken from there, as well as the grant applications writer's workbook. In terms of today's agenda, you know, I'm going to start out and talk for about 15 minutes about understanding the application as a whole and understanding your study section. And then I am joined by two amazing colleagues. The first is Dr. Kristen Zuloaga. I've known Dr. Zuloaga since 2017. She's now an associate professor and director of graduate studies in the Department of Neuroscience and Experimental Therapeutics at Albany Med. She was the co-founder of the New York Capital Region Postdoctoral Development Program. She sits on study section, and in her short tenure has had a number of NIH awards, including from NINDS and NIA, Alzheimer's Association, Right Focus. I remember one from AHA back in the day. And her research is focused in determining how sex, aging, sex hormones, and chronic stress influence vascular and metabolic contributions to dementia. When I thought about somebody that writes like just some of the best specific games I've ever seen, I thought of Kristen, and so wanted her to share some of her tips and tricks. Our third presenter will be Dr. Laleh Rad. Dr. Rad is an associate professor in radiology at Northwestern. She trained in Tehran in electrical engineering, and then did her postdoc in Toronto in medical biophysics, and then a postdoc at Harvard in radiology, which is at which time I met her. And we started working together on a number of DBS related projects. Her interest is MR safety, and again, in her short tenure has done amazing things, including a K award. And now, when I read her grants, I feel like there is so much I have left to learn. So I couldn't think of anybody better to write about storytelling and the K process. So welcome to both our speakers. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of grant writing. And, I think this is so foreign to so many of us who spend, a good amount of time in our neurosurgery training or medical school or as PhD students writing for publication. And writing for publication and writing a grant are two very different things. And you would think, just as some of us, would like to believe in meritocracy all the time, that, good science, it doesn't matter what you do, it would get funded. But, that's simply not the case. I think it's really important that you are a strong writer and learn the tips and tricks of grantsmanship. And you have to learn how to play kind of this grant game, and what people are looking for and where the pitfalls are, and use as many outstanding resources as you can as possible at first. Have everybody and anybody read your specific games. You're not going to take everybody's feedback, but I think each person will give you little nuances. Read other people's specific games. And, I think there's many documents, such as some of the ones I shared, that can be really helpful in this regard. So, there was a little period, probably about 10 years ago, where the pay lines got a little bit better, but now they're right down, where they used to be, somewhere around 9 to 12%, though some sections have higher pay lines. And that's probably grant tip number one. Think about where your grant can be submitted, because there are variable pay lines that you can find out online. You have to make sure that it's a reasonable place for your grants to go. But, this again, you want to give yourself the best chance of getting funded. And, so there is, that green box on this screen is the good science that just doesn't meet the pay line. And sometimes you get stuck in that box and you can't get it over the edge. And your first chance is really going to be on that first grant, because either you're going to get at that pay line or you're going to get somewhere in that box where you've set yourself up to move forward on the resubmission. So, make sure that as you're submitting this, it's not all about the science, and there's a lot of grantsmanship that can go into this. So, I think what are your goals? I think first, write a grant. So, you don't learn how to do this without a lot of practice. And so, sometimes I've seen people make the mistake of, when they're really in extremis and need to write this grant. And then, you don't want to do anything when you're under a lot of pressure. You want to practice this all the time, and, make sure that you define the cycles of grants and which grants you're going to submit to. You can't submit to everything. So, think about what your 1-year plan plan is in advance. And, you know, again, your goal is that your grant gets discussed, because you get a whole lot more feedback if you get a score and it's discussed than you do if it gets triaged, because then you just have 3 reviewers that are reading kind of in a void. So, you know, I think you have to think about who is reviewing your grant and, you know, what that's like. And, you know, so generally, you know, people that sit in study section, and I sat on study section for probably the past 15 years. This is something that, you know, I don't often do during my day job. And, you know, so I bring this home at night and I am reading grants on nights or on weekends. And, you know, then I frankly have other things I want to do, and, you know, work-life balance. And so I have to get through these grants, and, you know, they're often, you know, it's added to, you know, my agenda. And so you have to think about that and the situation your reviewer finds themselves in. So you want to make this exciting to your reviewer from the first moment. And when you see a good grant, it's really like an orchestra piece. It starts at that title page, and then, you know, they have it all played out so that the project abstract, the narrative, the bio sketches, they all paint this nice story about why this group is capable of doing this work and get you excited about it. And, you know, I think this culminates in the specific aims, where there, you know, what you're really aiming for is to make something sound reasonable, but also to get people really excited about it, that so that they want to put the time and effort into reading all that research strategy, where you really have to do a deep dive. You want to present something that reviewers want to read. You also want to make it easy for them to review. So, you know, when you're looking at the innovation or significance section, say, this is significant because, and things they can, you know, cut and paste almost, so that they can think about these things. And, you know, try to lead reviewers with your writing. I've heard it a lot of times, and I've thought this myself. Oh, I said that in my grant. Why didn't they get that? Well, if they don't get that, you know, it's a failure of you not repeating it. Like repetition is the mother of learning. And so it is okay in grants, and probably preferred, to say the same thing multiple times and in the same way. So as opposed to a paper where you have to tweak around the words, keep beating them over the head a little bit with, you know, what this is. And you want to make it easy for the reviewers to present this in study section. So when you're going to study section, you have the reviewers that have spent a lot of time on this, and then you have people that maybe have opened your specific aims page. And so they're trying to explain, and then the reviewers at study section are real quick, you know, going through your application to try to answer their like very nuanced question. So you want to give those reviewers the best opportunity to help you get funded. So, you know, again, you have lots of resources to do this. There have been many a grant written. Read good ones, read ones that have been successful. And you will find, you know, no matter what that topic is, even if it's a topic that you have no idea about, they hold, you know, kind of the same patterns of that great storytelling. They have that, you know, the KISS principle of keep it simple, and, you know, just use best practices, all in all. If you are invited to a study section in any way, go, because you will learn this process, and it's really eye-opening to understand. And I've become a much better grant writer since I've been serving on study section. So, you know, we're talking about grantsmanship. You know, that doesn't mean that the science isn't important, and science is important. And, you know, you have to focus on, you know, where your science is bringing you. There's also certain things that your reviewers will, you know, have to comment on: scientific rigor, justification of biologic variables. You know, is this feasible? And so you have to, again, make this come out and stand out at them. When you're presenting this, again, you know, if you want it, it's an important point, underline it, highlight it, change the color of it, do something that draws people's attention to this and helps break things down, so that, you know, it really becomes a pleasure for people to read. So what needs to be in your grant application? You know, you have a hypothesis, and, you know, that hypothesis is your novel quest for information. Is it important? That's your significance and innovation. This is what gets your reviewer super excited about your grant, and then gets them to spend more effort going into all the other things. You paint the nice story with investigator and environment, and then it comes down to approach. What are your three aims? How do those intertwine? And is it feasible? And know what these are, and these are, the categories you're going to get scored on. So, this is a little bit different, and Dr. Rad will go into this, but, when you're thinking about the K award, not only do you have to have your research strategy, but, the second most important part of the grant, maybe, equally as important, is what's your training plan? And what is this going to bring to you? What is this going to bring to the field? How have you set up this plan? What's the environment like? And you have to be crystal clear on this, because there's been plenty of applications that have good science and all the right people, but when it comes to these K-type awards, they don't do a good enough job explaining the training approach. In terms of rigor, what does that mean? This is some of the statistics. This is some of the, understanding what your group sizes need to be, how you're reducing bias, how you're managing missed data, how you're improving precision. This is important in human data. This is also important in animal data. This is important when you're doing machine learning, or, just setting up what those outcomes are. What are your possible alternatives? What are your pitfalls? And thinking logically about, how many data sources you need to do this. So we've mentioned a lot about the reviewers, and I think it's important to understand that that's only a step in this process. And so I've had it where I get a great score, and after study section you get a great score, and effectively you're going to get funded. They'll ask for the just-in-time documents, but you're way below the pay line, and barring something very weird happening, you will get funded. Having said that, sometimes you sit on the cusp. And so then it's a series of, horse trading that goes on levels above the study section, where you have to make sure that your program officer really supports this, really gets the grant, and can move this forward to the end for you. My first grant, which is still, 11 years later, still going. This was how we got this over the fence. It was the program officer, I think it was like 4 levels of meetings he had to go to get this funded. So that happens, and stay on top of it and answer people's questions clearly and concisely. And thinking about, going back to, the study section itself, we talked about the reviewers when they're reading this, let's talk about them presenting it a little bit. This is luck of the draw. This is like when you're an applicant for medical school, PhD program, residency, some of this depends who's reviewing your grant. And there's a wide variety of experience. There's a wide variety of opinions. And then they're going to have different presentation styles. So know that this is a variable that, you're trying to, make sure that you are covering all bases. And oftentimes, I'm asked to review grants that I am not a topic matter expert in. It may be about the brain, so it's on my docket, but, make it so that everybody can understand it clearly. In terms of, everybody else on the panel, what they do is, they're involved in, and again, this says you have 3 reviewers that all have equal votes, but then you go to the panel and you have like a review panel of like 20 people. And, what they're doing is commenting on what the reviewer said, and then they're asked whether they want to vote within a range of what the reviewer is doing. And so you're going to see 2 scores. You're going to see your percentile and your impact score. And, that's why there can be a discrepancy, because it depends almost on, what that panel says. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So, I think the biggest take home of this is that you shouldn't think of the reviewers as your barriers, but you want to think of them as your advocates, because that's truly what they are. So you want to make their job as easy as possible to sell your ideas and put you in the right position. In a general synopsis, I talked a little bit about an approach making sense. I think this is a great slide to take a picture of. You're talking about the gap and need, and that's what's coming from your significance and innovation section. Then you're coming up with, what that objective is, and then your hypothesis around it. And you want to make sure that these are logical, and that your specific aims address what that objective is, address the central hypothesis, and that you have actually answered the question by the end of this. And so spending time on the approach and really making sure this is just super tight in terms of answering these questions, and very logical can be essential. So in conclusion, good science gets you into the discussion and literally gets your grant discussed. Your grantsmanship is going to get you over the hurdle, because that's going to increase the enthusiasm of your reviewer. Make your application tell a whole story. And if you make your reviewers' lives easier, they're going to be advocates. Thank you very much. And I am happy to turn it over to Dr. Zuloaga.
Thank you, Julie. That was great. I'm going to kind of pick up where you left off, because we have similar sources that we were using. So that is great. I'm going to be focusing more on the specific aims, specifically this just disclosures of our funding. The resources that I used to create this were pretty much the same as what Julie did. Was this grant applications writer's workbook that the NIH puts out. So I highly encourage you to get a copy of this. As you can see, multiple people think this is very useful. And also I was introduced to a lot of these resources through the junior faculty development program that I participated in at Albany Med, that actually Dr. Pilitsis was the founder of that at Albany Med. And so I also got these from some of this content from the class that I had taken back in 2017 when I first started. There's also a very helpful tool about creating a bulleted outline of your aims page. I'm going to go through a little bit of it today, but you can find this on grantcentral.com. So I'll go over that. We already heard a little bit about kind of what the overall purpose of the grant is. With the aims page, what you're really trying to focus on is getting across your idea. What's this research gap that you're going to fill? Why is this needed to move the field forward? And really highlight your significance and impact, because that is it's going to get your reviewers really excited. So how is this work in advanced science? If it's more of a basic science proposal, I think with this audience, you're more going to be focusing on how this is going to advance human health, because this is going to be more translational work and clinical proposals, I'm guessing. And then another thing that is great, if you can get across in your aims page, is illustrate why your team is ideally suited to carry out this work. And so ways that you can get this across is through, hopefully you have some very exciting preliminary data. If it's a type of grant that allows preliminary data, some don't, depending on what kind you're applying for. Maybe you have novel tools, you have this expertise that not very many people have. So reasons why you are and your team are the ones that should be answering this particular research question. And so we just heard about kind of the study sections and how those work. One of the first things that reviewers are going to do when they get assigned the grant is actually read the aims page. So this is your chance to make a first impression. There's some reviewers that'll read your bio sketch first. I would say that's the second most common thing to read first, but many of them are going to read your aims page first. And many of them are going to, after reading that one page, kind of make a preliminary score judgment. It's not their final score, but your score is probably not going to get better than that first impression. Your score is probably going to get worse, because they're going to go in their approach and they're going to find all the things they have problems with. So this is like the best you're going to get is the first impression that you make. And so again, as we just heard, this is your chance to try to make them your advocate. And so you want them going in after reading that one page, super excited to read the rest of the grant, and going in with a really positive mindset versus being frustrated. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the things that might frustrate them. And then the other thing, all those other panel members that you have, the 20 or 25 people that weren't one of the primary reviewers, they might be skimming your grant as it's being presented. So the panel is going to talk about the grant for 15 or 20 minutes. During that time, the aims page is only a page long, so they might be skimming that. They're probably also going to be looking at your figures. But it's one of the things that might impact whether they're given a range to vote within. If they liked your aims page, maybe they're going to vote on the better end of that range versus the worst. So it's another thing that more people than your primary reviewers might be looking at. So it's another reason why it's really important that you put a lot of time into the aims page. I probably put when I'm writing a grant, at least a third of my time into the aims page versus the whole rest of the grant, because it's just the most important part. Okay, so we already saw this. This is a different version of of what you just saw about how important it is to have this linear progression. And so we can talk about some of the things that are going to frustrate your reviewers. So it's really going to frustrate your reviewers if you spend all this time setting up this amazing gap in knowledge that really needs to be filled. And then the objective of your proposal is not to fill that gap. They're going to be like, well, why aren't you doing this? And why are they thinking that? Because you set them up to that something was really important, then you didn't answer that question. Another thing that's going to frustrate them is that if you have this amazing hypothesis and then your aims aren't actually testing that hypothesis, that's going to frustrate them. And we'll go over some more things in a minute, but this kind of logical progression is very important, because otherwise they're not going to be able to follow along and they're not going to be excited about the grant after this page. So if you're having trouble figuring out what should be on the aims page, you're having writer's block, or you're trying to help a trainee write a first grant, a thing that can be really useful is having this tool that you can download, and it helps you create a bulleted outline of your aims page. Before I knew this tool existed, I'd actually made this for myself and my trainees. So I have one that's like a personalized one. Then I found out about this tool when someone was giving a talk like this for the postdoc program that I run. But it's really cool. So this is just one example. So this is like, if you go into that tool, they explain to you how to write your opening sentence. So they explain to you why it's so important that you capture their intention with this opening sentence. And then they say, write your bullet point here and delete the preceding text. And so they kind of walk you through the aims page and how to do each part that you're going to need. And I'm going to go through some of this, but not through the tool. But what's going to happen with your opening paragraph, there's a lot of things you're going to need to get through. And this oftentimes will end up taking up about half the page. So you're going to need some sort of opening sentence that's really going to capture their attention and make them very excited about this area that you're going to be addressing. You need to spend a little bit of time telling what the current knowledge in the field is, only so that you can identify that gap and what is missing. And this gap in knowledge is the thing that you're going to hopefully be trying to fill in your proposal. And then the statement of need is more like saying, if this gap isn't filled, then these are going to be the consequences. So there's not going to be a new therapy for whatever it is that you're studying if this gap isn't filled. And this can go here, or it can also go at the very end, where you're going to have an impact statement. You're also, this is optional, but oftentimes included. You can include a sentence about your long-term goal. So for your research program, the long-term goal isn't something that's going to necessarily be accomplished during this grant. This grant is going to help you move you towards that long-term goal. So that part is optional, but it can kind of give them a sense of who you are and where you're going. But the objective is really important. So that's what you're trying to accomplish during this particular grant. So in the tool that I linked to, they have you write the hypothesis first and then state the preliminary data and rationale for that hypothesis. I like doing it reverse, and I normally see people do it reverse in grants. So I like to have it here, lay out your preliminary data if you have preliminary data. And if you don't, the rationale based on the literature that leads you into that hypothesis. So this all kind of needs to be done. It can be 1 or 2 paragraphs, and this is going to take up pretty much the first half of your page, of your aims page. After that, you'll go into your specific aims. And so this could be anywhere. Normally it's 3 aims. Sometimes it's 2. Sometimes it's 4. I would say 3 is definitely the most common, and 2 is the next most common. If you're writing a really grant that has a really short timeline, say it's a 1-year grant for some foundation or something, maybe you only have 1 aim. But if you're doing a 5-year grant, you should have more than 1 aim. So you're going to have the title of your aim. It's really great if you can use active words. So you're going to test the hypothesis that you're going to determine if. So something like that. If you need to add any more rationale, so say you have some extra preliminary data you need to highlight here or something for them to understand what you're going to be doing in the same, you can add that. And then you need to give them a broad idea of what you're going to do for the same. So a broad overview of the approach. So major models you might be using or methods, but don't go into too much detail. We don't need to know the dose of your drugs at this point in time or anything like that. You can save those for the approach, but we do need to be able to get a sense of what you're going to do so that when they walk away from the aims page, they have a good sense of what they're going to find in that approach. If you have room, it can be very helpful for you to also, at the end of each aim, have a sentence about what you expect to find. We predict that. this helps them to just, it's kind of spoon feeding them about, okay, remember my hypothesis was this, so this is what I think is going to happen. And it's just going to make it easier for them to be able to kind of walk through this. And so then you need to do this for each of your aims. And then at the very end of the aims page, you would want to have an impact statement. So this is where you're going to kind of wrap everything up and tell them how important it is. So what you expect to accomplish, again, this whole impact statement is probably only going to be like 2 sentences, but what you expect to accomplish, how this is going to move the field forward, and kind of this consequences if it's not met. So why we really need to fund your work. And so this is just an example of one of my aims pages this was from my first R1, but you can see I took up a lot of space with that initial overview, and then my aims and impact statement is just something little at the end, but it really wraps it up so that they can get that take home message. So all the things that we just talked about, it's a lot to fit in a page. It's probably going to take you a lot of time to be editing it and to concisely get it to fit within that one page. So if you have your aims page, what are the things that we talked about? Some of the things already that are going to frustrate your reviewers. There's a couple other things that are going to frustrate your reviewers. If your hypothesis is not novel, that's going to frustrate your reviewers. It's going to make them not very excited about your grant. We already said this, but if your aims don't actually test your hypothesis, that's a problem. Another thing that is a very common complaint from reviewers is that your aims are interdependent. So for example, let's say aim 1 doesn't work out and your hypothesis is incorrect. If that then makes aims 2 and 3 not worth doing, that's going to be a really big problem. And so this is what they mean by them being interdependent on each other. Another thing that I often see in reviews and people getting upset about is ignoring key literature, especially if it contradicts your hypothesis. So you need to actually have shown the reviewers that you took time to read about this field and this idea that you're proposing and know what's been done in the past. And if you don't do that, it's not going to be good. It's going to frustrate them, especially if they are experts in that field and they know you're not citing really important work. The last thing, which we've already heard how important this is just poor grantsmanship. My biggest pet peeve personally is when people don't define their acronyms or are using too many acronyms and you're just like reading a sea of abbreviations that don't mean anything to you, and you have to spend all this time searching back to see what they meant, and if they never defined it, it's really frustrating. Another thing one of my trainees was doing that a reviewer pointed out is really long, complex sentences that you have to reread multiple times. I think they phrase this as dense writing. But if you have a sentence and that sentence is going on 3 or 4 lines and you made it all one sentence, that's going to be a problem. These reviewers are tired. They're reading tons of these, and you need to make things as easy for them to read as possible. So like break things down and make it easy for them to read. So what's going to excite them? Kind of the opposite of this. If it's very clearly written, if it's easy to read, if you have that logical flow that we've talked about, your hypothesis is novel, your aims don't depend on each other. So if aim 1 doesn't work out, it's okay. Aim 2 is still going to be really exciting because it's not depending on it at all. If you have innovative approaches, so if you have novel models, you're using novel methods, those are things that you're going to want to hype up. They're going to be excited to read more about them in the approach, but just let them know here. And then also, if you have strong preliminary data, it's not required for all types of grants, but it's always a benefit unless there's a very few grants. There are a couple of types that don't allow you to have any. So you need to read the RFA to see what you're allowed to include, but that's ways to make your reviewers happy. And then the very last steps to actually have a really good aims page is that you actually need to get feedback from other people. It can't just be you that read your aims if you want them to be really good. You need to get feedback from your collaborators, if you have collaborators on the grant, but then also from your colleagues. So not just people who are really close to your topic, but someone who's a little bit outside. So when I was submitting my first R1, actually, Dr. Pilitsis had me sent out to some other faculty she identified that were supposed to help me because I was a new PI at the time, and they were a little bit outside of my field. And it was incredibly helpful because the things that I thought should have been crystal clear were confusing to them because they're a little bit outside my field, but that's who your reviewers are. Some of them will be really close to your field and some are going to be a little bit outside, and it needs to be really clear to everybody. And that's one of the easiest ways to figure out how clear it is for other people is to have other people read it and then revise it afterwards. So that's like the final really important step. So the sooner you get these aims done, and can get them and send them out for feedback, the better your grant's going to be, because you'll actually have time to get that feedback and incorporate those changes. So planning ahead and not waiting until the last minute is super important. And that is it.
And to round us out, we have Dr. Rad.
Okay, awesome. I just loved listening to you. And we're going to shake things up a little bit. I'm going to change how we're doing this. I have very few slides. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, but we're not going to go through so many slides. We're going to write, well, actually not writing now, but we're going to read some stories together. I think you have heard a lot about why storytelling is important. I was thinking about how can I get the point across to everybody, and I thought probably the best way is to show you some stories, and then you will have that visceral reaction, hopefully by the end of reading them together, and then we'll figure out better what I mean. There were a couple of things that Julie mentioned and Kristen mentioned that were so important that I really feel that I have to emphasize. You know, there were, like, many years ago, you could get grants that were fairly widely distributed in terms of interesting science. That's not the case anymore. If you guys are going to submit a grant, you're going to be competing with a group of highly talented, really interesting people that have really good science to present. So the point that will get you across the pay line is not just how interesting your science is, because everybody else's science is interesting. The point that will help you is how you engage the reviewer on an emotional level. So something that we tend to forget all the time is that the people who are reading these grants are humans. And we make a decision 50% based on our gut feeling and what we feel and how our emotions in response to something that we're reading, rather than rational thinking. There might be some time in the future that AI is reviewing our grants. It could very well happen. That's not the case right now. So we have a chance of impacting people by pulling these emotional strings. And everybody tells you that, but it's really hard to understand exactly what that means. So when I started, actually, my first RO1 also was read by Julie, and she basically rewrote many parts of it and made it much better. When I started thinking about my first RO1, the point that Kristen made, that you have to start very, very, very early, because believe it or not, like it or not, and it's really actually annoying, but your specific aims page is going to change till the last minute. You start writing your grant, but you still keep changing your specific aims page. So the sooner you can get it out and get feedback, it's going to be better for you. So when I started, I sent it out to many senior people to read, and my department chair actually came back to me and said, hey, I think you should hire this particular person to help you in grant writing. And the person was actually specialized in storytelling. So what I'm hoping to do, I'm sure that I cannot make you good a storyteller in 10 minutes. What I'm hoping to do is convince you something that, maybe a scientist would never think of doing. You should go and take a storytelling artistic course. This is an investment that you'll see it's going to pay off. And I'm going to send you some links. Actually, I was Googling that some really interesting courses for storytelling in business and in science, and how it can change the way that we write. So let me share my screen and let's do things. Give me a minute. Okay, so everybody sees my screen. So you want to tell a story about your work. So that grant specialist was a very expensive guy. So the materials I'm going to share with you is something that I paid around $7,000 for him just to send me these grantsmanship tips. And then this part that I'm sharing with you was actually really useful for me. So let's read 2 stories together, and then by the show of hand, you tell me which one you would find. Imagine it's England, 932 AD. It's Her Majesty's Research Funding Council for the Trades, pay line 8%. We have 2 grants. So I'm going to read it out loud, but everybody can read it along with me. PI Blacksmith Jones. And these are exact same science, but just presented with 2 different stories. We have developed a system for improving the strength of horseshoe nails. During the hot forging, instead of rotating 90 degrees in the same direction after every hammer strike, we choose the rotational sequence from a pseudo-random distribution. This process results in nails that are 30% stronger for pure iron. Adding 1% carbon makes them even stronger. With generous funding from Her Majesty, we will figure out the optimal parameters for roto forging and carbon. This work will have both substantial industrial and military impact. This is pretty much how I wrote my first specific aims page. Now, let's tell the exact same story, but a little bit differently. So that's PI Blacksmith Smith. The Vikings have killed 6,000 of us already this year, and it's only August. Their boats are fast, they land at night, and their swords are strong and sharp. We're all but doomed. The Vikings' only weakness is that their boats aren't big enough to bring many horses. Our cavalry is our only advantage. We have the world's best cavalrymen, but only half of our horses even make it to battle due to broken horseshoe nails. There is a critical need to develop more durable horseshoe nails. I have developed a system for improving the strength of horseshoe nails involving rotating the nails in a particular manner during forging and adding some carbon. With generous funding from Her Majesty, we will make horseshoe nails even stronger. Stronger horseshoe nails would result in cavalry arriving at battle to defend the Vikings, save English lives, and preserve the crown. So, what do you think? I don't see our attendees anymore, but if just with a show of hand, how many of you will fund the second one? Yeah, that's what I assume. So that's when we talk about the storytelling. It's not even and again, Kristen was absolutely right that when reviewers, because I have been sitting on review sessions, panels for the past 5-6 years. By the time that you finish this one page, you are either planning to go and fight for the applicant, or you are going to spend the rest of your time finding weaknesses just to make sure that it's not going to get discussed, so you don't even have to bring it up in a panel. It's important to make the reviewer like you, and we're going to talk about you and then your grant, because there's a little difference between the R grant and a K grant. In R grant, you just need to make them like the grant and the idea, and the way to do it to kind of work within their visceral reaction to whatever you're talking about, considering that they might not even know the details of your science. It is true that at least one of those reviewers will be somebody, well, most likely, will be somebody that has the detailed knowledge of your field, but you have a really good chance that at least one of the 3 reviewers are going to be kind of out of the field. And NIH is doing this more and more just to make sure that people get some kind of fair review, because if everybody is within your field, they're going to be a little bit more harsh, because even if not directly, you're going to be their rival a little bit. So they want to bring in people that are completely outside of the field, but still good scientists, because we can judge the goodness of science. But our judgment is always kind of tainted with how we feel about somebody's science. So that's why spending time and developing strategies for storytelling is important. And I really advise everybody who wants to get serious about grants to do a little bit of time investment. They're really good courses. They are not scientific courses. They are literally storytelling courses. But some of them, they do have a good emphasis on people who have positions in leadership roles in business, in industry, and in academia. And then those courses are tailored specifically to make you to be able to write in this particular way. Now, well, of course, Blacksmith got the grant. So this is about the power of storytelling when you are writing your specific aims page, or the whole.
I didn't understand.
Oh, sorry, the whole approach part of the grant. So because you basically get whatever that you wrote in the specific aims, which you blow it up, and that's what makes your significant portion, that what's make your approach and innovation and so on. Another thing is that if you're writing a K grant, you have to tell a story about you. And this becomes a little critical because most of K grants, they do have a significant portion that's the applicant's background and also your mentoring plan. And I want to emphasize on the applicant background. I assume that some very lucky people, they had the privilege of knowing exactly what they wanted to do since they were 16. So basically, from the very beginning, you exactly knew what your next step would be. If you are in that category, you're very lucky. You already have a really good story to tell. For the rest of us, me included, and probably 98% of us, many of things that happened in our career was even in reaction to something that we really didn't have much control over, or was kind of an afterthought. So I have seen many cases of this applicant backgrounds that they seem like incoherent. It seemed like the applicant is jumping from doing a postdoc in field X to another postdoc in another field, or doing some type of training that might not really fit in the story. If you are just presenting whatever that you have done in a matter-of-fact way, it will have a much less impact in making the reviewers to consider you a very plausible applicant, rather than you just come up with a story as if you've done everything deliberately from the beginning to just get where you are. And this was, again, one of the really good advices that somebody told me, that rewrite the story. You don't need to tell everybody all the truth of why you did what you did. You just need to come up with a good story so they would think how smart you were since you were 15. So again, this is something that I would have written about myself, considering my path, which was deviating from one thing to another. But let's just look at the matter-of-fact version and then the storytelling version. So you could, and again, for your for the background, I do have a training in electrical engineering, and I did a PhD in computational electromagnetics, nothing to do with healthcare, and then I pivoted to medical imaging and radiology. So the matter-of-fact version would be something like that. I completed a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in the illustrious School of Hard Wires, followed by a Master of Science in Telecommunication from the Steamed Wave and Field Institute. Of course, this is the entertaining version. These are fictional institutions. For my PhD, I took my talent to the Big Shot Academy, where I specialized in computational electromagnetics. After earning my PhD, I decided to shake things up and ventured into the world of medical imaging and MRI, thanks to the generous Big Deal Fellowship. Not stopping there, I dove into a second postdoctoral fellowship, this time focusing on functional MRI, just to keep things interesting. So again, that was pretty much the first version that I wrote. And I thought that I've done a good job of glorifying all the institutions that I have been, and the Big Shots fellowships that I've got. And then somebody taught me to do things a little different. So this is the second version. Again, this is the humorous version. You're not going to write it like that, but you'll get what I'm talking about. So from the moment I stepped into the School of Hard Wires to earn my bachelor in electrical engineering, I was captivated by the invisible forces that power our world. This fascination led me to Fields and Waves Institute, where I pursued a master's in telecommunication, focusing on complex interactions of fields and waves. It wasn't just about theory. I saw these forces as the key to solve real-world problems, which is not true. Somebody who does a PhD in computational electromagnetics doesn't want to do anything about the real-world problem. That's a person that's fascinated about theory and science and abstract thinking and doesn't want to do anything with the real world. And then what actually happened was that in the middle of my PhD, I got so frustrated and I felt that I really hate this subject. And I was so desperate to change the subject that I applied and got a fellowship to change it. But you don't need to tell them that you did it out of frustration. You tell them that you, from the beginning, you wanted to do this, to go to the next step because you wanted to first know how the world works and then use this knowledge to actually change the world. So that's why I chose to deepen my expertise with a PhD in computational electromagnetics at Big Shot Academy. My goal was clear. I wanted to master the art of modeling and manipulating electromagnetic fields to create innovative solutions. But as I earned the pinnacle of my academic journey, I realized something was missing. I wanted to apply my skills to a field where the stakes were higher, human health. So as if I really had decided to do that. And by the way, between me and you, I chose to go to University of Toronto, medical biophysics. It's a really good school. That's where I did my first postdoc. But that's not the best place for what I was proposing to do. There are very better places to do medical imaging. And the reason that I went to University of Toronto was that my boyfriend at the time was living in Toronto. So this is actual life. This is what's happening in probably most of our life, boyfriends and girlfriends and messy life. And your art is basically just package it slightly differently from what actually happened. So with this in mind, I secured the Big Deal Fellowship and pivoted into the world of medical imaging and MRI. Here I found a perfect convergence of my previous work in electromagnetics and my desire to make a tangible impact on people's life. This wasn't just a shift. This was a natural evolution of my career. This is what you want to convince them, that everything that you have done, all of these seemingly non-connected steps, they were a natural evolution of what you wanted to do. To build on this foundation, I pursued a second postdoctoral fellowship in functional MRI, where I'm now focused on advancing the technology to better understand the human brain. Each step has been a deliberate move toward harnessing electromagnetic science for the greater good. So this was basically what I was trying to convey, that it's important to realize it is not important if you are missing that big, convergent, cohesive background. I didn't have it. I was afraid a little bit. I decided that I'm going to take my chances. And I really think everybody has a really good chance. Because again, what happened is what you tell them that happened, but it's important to know how to tell it. There are really good courses. I just found one this morning that I plan to attend. Actually, I didn't know it's from Northwestern. It's a leadership communication for maximum impact with the whole emphasis on the storytelling. It's free. It's on Coursera. There are multiple other courses. This one is just 3 hours. It's not a lot of time commitment, but I think what you get after that will really empower you to add that little edge, that little difference, because it's just one impact factor higher or lower that makes the decision of one thing getting funded and the other really good science not getting funded. So I'm going to stop here. And yeah.
Thank you so much to Dr. Rad and Dr. Zuloaga. Dr. Ziffel, do we have time to take questions?
We do. We got a couple minutes, and I really enjoyed the presentations. Thanks so much. They all kind of complement each other with different kind of thoughts. So thanks for doing that. But yeah, let's take some questions. Anybody have any questions about they'd like to ask?
I see one in the chat. It's, would the panelists recommend the course run by the creators of the NIH Grant Work Writers Application Handbook, given its expense, or similar ones? For context, I'm a postdoc working with my faculty mentor on several NIH Foundation grants.
So we had this workshop, they came, I don't know. Yeah, it was, I think maybe like the first year that I was at Albany Med, they came and they had it, but it was for like all of faculty. So I think it's like worth it if your institution is investing it and you're going to like have everybody go to it. But I think it's quite pricey if you were going to do it and actually have to like, I don't know if you have to like fly somewhere to do it otherwise, but they had them come to our institution and do it. And I thought it was really good. And they gave you the workbook afterwards. You could also just read like the workbook. I think the like the content that was in the workbook, although it's quite large. I think you could get it all from that, but it was nice if your institution is doing it. That's the level I did it on before.
Well, maybe I'll have a question for maybe the panel. Sounds like maybe Julie, you set something up at Albany in your past life, but what are your thoughts about mock study reviews? A lot of institutions or departments have set that up. Any thoughts or advocacy for that type of approach?
Yeah, so, I think that one of the things we did was we had a junior faculty development program, and it was all around a research project. So what we did there was we had to submit specific aims and, then kind of have people read them and then defend them. I think there's a variety of ways to do this. When we tried to, and that worked well. But then when we tried to operationalize it kind of department-wide, it became a little bit tricky because you have to have your aims done a little bit far in advance. I do think it's a good exercise to do at some level. It gets hard to really codify it. And then the other thing that you want to keep in mind is, often when you're looking for jobs as a surgeon scientist or lab funding, you'll be asked to do that during the job interview process or something similar. So you want to have at least some of that experience.
Yeah, we set up for the postdoc program and our grad program right now, there's a grant writing class and they combine it, but we actually do a mock study section where the faculty, I just did it actually last week, where we have faculty that are actors in it. And so we play out the whole study section, what you would do in a study section. So we have summary statements from grants, and there's someone playing reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3, and we do it for 2 different grants, and we act it out, and it's really fun. And so we do that for the trainees, and I think they learn a lot from that, just seeing what the study section is like, how people are interacting together, how much of everything is chance, and kind of the mood people are in or the personalities they have. So I think getting exposure to what that would be like to be on a study section if you haven't been invited to go to one, I think is something that is very fun and easy to set up for trainees if you just have, some faculty that are willing to volunteer some time.
I also want to add a comment. I've been in a couple of those. It works really, really well if you have faculty that spend the time and actually really read through those aims. It's a lot to ask. Usually people who are seasoned and they do have something to contribute don't find the time to do that. So it's like kind of a hit or miss. Those that I have been in. One thing that we did in Northwestern that was not an emphasis on grant writing, but it was really useful for me, was that they had writing retreats. So our Office of Provost just started this program every summer that you could apply for that, and if you get accepted, there would be a full week of you going somewhere to a really nice, well-conditioned place, and you sit there and only write. They give you breakfast, lunch. They pack a dinner for a family of 4. So you go home, you don't worry about cooking or anything. So your family's fed. It was tremendously successful. And people from arts and sciences were there, from social sciences, not just the STEM, but it also was really helpful for those of us in the STEM sciences that really needed some concentrated time for grant writing, because at the end it comes to finding the peace of mind and concentration to do some prolonged hours of work, which is really hard for some of very busy people, especially clinically active people, to do that. So those type of retreats could be really helpful, and people could apply for them and say, hey, I have a grant deadline at that such and such date, and they commit to submit something, and then they will use this 1 week of retreat. And you have to show up, you have to commit that you go every day from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and do nothing but writing. It was very interesting.
There's 2 additional questions in the chat. One is, what considerations does the panel have for people coming from clinically oriented programs with little or no external funding and or research? And is there any value in getting insight from the business colleagues who have more experience in marketing storytelling domains? So I think for the first question, I think as Dr. Rad told the story and her story, I appreciate her story and how she was talking about how things were not connected, but at the same time, it was this journey, of frustration and finding her way. And so I think if you know that there's something that's like a deficit in your training, what you want to make sure of is that when you go to the next step in fellowship, you can get that experience. I also think you can make mentors along the way outside of, outside of your specialty. I know in functional neurosurgery in particular, like we're more than happy to help you in a variety, and I suspect that's true for tumor and some other sections that are really into promoting young scientists. In terms of the second question, yeah, absolutely. I think business people do this all the time. And so I think, the stories are similar, and where you learn to do it, I think is, I think it's a skill. And then I do say you need to practice. I think sometimes people tell us, when we're seeing patients, don't use humor unless you're funny or you're good at it, because it's a little bit dicey. And so with some of the storytelling things, Dr. Rad is an expert at it. I think it is a nuanced, advanced level skill. And so you want to make sure that, as opposed to business people that can sometimes be hyperbolic, you're doing it within the confines of, NIH and trying to get funded.
Yeah, that's absolutely important, because at the end of the day, don't underestimate the intellect and competence of people who are reviewing these grants. Every single grant that I submitted, and there was something that I was like, yeah, probably they don't get it, and it doesn't really make sense to me. They got it, and it didn't make sense to them too. So storytelling is not lying, basically. It's just saying what happened from a different angle. So that's important to know. Another thing is I really want to emphasize, because I see it over and over again, and both Julie and Kristen said it, and I need to say it again because you have to say it and say it again and say it once more. Don't wait until you are perfectly ready. There is no perfect grant. Your goal is not to write the perfect grant. Your goal is to write a grant that is less bad in the bunch of grants that goes to that study section. Because 3 times a year, every study section has to review a bunch of grants, has to fund something. There is no year that NIH says, well, we didn't get really good grants, we're not going to fund anything. Something is going to get funded. If yours is not there, somebody else is going to be, and none of those are perfect grants. So the question is, which one is less bad? Practice, not just practice for yourself. Practice means submit more. And then the process gets easier and easier. Once you do it for the first grant, you will have the bulk of administrative work, which is annoyingly more cumbersome than the science part done, that you will reuse in consequent grants, but practice and submit more.
Great. Well, I just want to thank the panelists. This was a really engaging session, and thanks, Julie, for inviting some people outside of the neurosurgery world to help us. I really learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. Again, there's another webinar with Bob Carter coming up in a couple of months. Stay tuned to that. Anybody going to CNS, there is going to be a neurosurgeon scientist seminar put on by Costas. If he's still on, he might want to say something about it, but look for it. Many of the faculty that are on this or have been part of these webinars are going to be part of that. And it's just kind of engaging and further developing the community of neurosurgeon scientists. As Julie said, we're all here and we want to help the next generation. And even if it's not a formal mentoring or mock study section, there's lots of us who want to help. Just reach out and find the community and add to the community, and you're going to find people to help you along your way. So I'll leave it at that. And Julie, if you want to have a last word, and then we can close.
This was really great. And, I think just to echo what Dr. Ziffel had, it's great to have this community, and we're here to help. And so with anybody that has any questions, I know, feel free to reach out to me or the other panelists, and always, the group of folks that's always on here, Dr. Ziffel, or, and colleagues. So thank you all for spending your evening with us. And I hope we taught you something. Thanks so much.
Have a good night, everybody.